Hello, I'm Katie Robbins Case. I'm one of the practicum specialists at the Grace Abbott School of Social Work. In this video, I'm going to be talking about tips for doing group supervision with practicum students. So group supervision definitely looks a little different than individual supervision. As the supervisor, there are a lot of ways to facilitate, and you'll probably just have to do some trial and error to see what you like, to see what matches your style, because a lot of it's going to depend on the student's needs as well. So ideally, all of your students are going to be at the same educational level, so BSW, MSW Foundation, or MSW Advanced, just so that you can tailor your supervision to their educational needs. If not, it's totally okay too, but it makes it a little bit trickier because some of the topics aren't going to apply for every student. So something to think about. The state of Nebraska does state that you cannot supervise more than 6 students or supervisees in a group at a time. So that's for not only students but also provisionally licensed folks. So just keep that in mind. In my opinion, I think 6 can be kind of a lot to feel like you're doing good supervision in an hour. So I would recommend, if you're new to group supervision or before you kind of know where your comfort level is, starting with maybe something like 3 or 4, and then go from there. So sometimes it also takes a few group sessions to really get a feel for how comfortable each student is within the field, especially based off of how much experience they have, their maturity level, their confidence. And I think it's really beneficial to have students at all comfort levels because they learn from each other. And I'm going to touch on that here in a little bit. So as the supervisor, group supervision does take a little bit more getting used to in regards to making sure that each student is getting what they need and having the opportunity to ask questions and talk about specific cases at their practicum site. So to build on the comfort or skill levels of students, you inevitably are going to have groups of students at all different skill and comfort levels. So if we look at students very basically, at levels 1, 2, and 3, we can kind of break down the needs of each student and hopefully tailor supervision for them. So if you'd like a little bit deeper look at these levels, there's another training specifically on managing various skill levels and giving appropriate feedback that you might be interested in. But for group supervision, level 1 really encompasses the students with the least amount of skill. So they often need the most guidance and explanations of concepts and duties. And typically these students have not been in situations that were really good or bad. So they don't have a lot of experience. And they're not quite sure what to expect in different experiences. So they're going to need some help understanding even what happened when they start working. So they're highly motivated, they're passionate, they're interested, but they have a lot of anxiety. So they're going to be asking a lot of questions and fearful to kind of branch out on their own, but they're also going to be kind of fearful of doing it wrong and being evaluated for it. So keeping that in mind, like in all levels, these level 1 students are going to need a lot of reassurance. They're going to need to hear what they're doing well. And it's important because they're learning, these level 1 students especially are learning so much. It starts to feel like everything they're doing needs to be changed or adjusted. So in group supervision settings, these students sometimes feel like they're dominating the conversation because they have a lot of questions and hopefully they're excited about what they're doing. But as a supervisor, it's important to give everyone a chance to respond. So it's tempting just to give answers to level 1 students, but so much more helpful to your group and to your students if you ask for their opinions first. So allow students to brainstorm together and correct or offer insight where needed. And I like to then ask the other group members if they have experienced similar situations in their practicums or at their jobs. I think this can really help link experiences and give everyone a chance to be heard. So level 2 students often have some limited experience in the field, but they're a little insecure in their abilities. They've probably had some good experiences, but some bad ones too. They could feel kind of some embarrassment or feel a little unsure about some of the times where it didn't go well. And often these students they might come across as really confident or that they have a lot of answers, but sometimes it seems like they're just kind of half correct, or maybe they haven't thought it through all the way yet. And it might be kind of tricky to give feedback to a student at this level because they're trying really hard to appear competent. Um, of course, this is a generalization, and students express their skills and their abilities in a lot of different ways. But this phase of balancing competence and insecurity is a stage that a lot of people go through. So, as a supervisor, it's important to offer praise, but also this direct feedback. And one way for level 2 students, you can think about offering that feedback, and especially in a group situation. So it sounds like you had some really good success with this client. I'm wondering if anyone has any other ways of dealing or managing or addressing this situation with this client. Right? So opening it up to the group to get other suggestions. And if no one has anything else, feel free to offer some. And I almost always offer my thoughts or opinions at the end if they haven't already been addressed by another student, just to make sure that they feel like I'm hearing and appreciating what they're talking about, and offering some insight if I feel like it's appropriate. So in my experience, students, they kind of often gloss over what didn't go so well sometimes, especially at this level 2 phase. So it might take a little bit of digging to get to the information. And that's why I think it's good to ask a lot of specific questions to get the full picture, or even asking questions like point blank, what went well? What would you change? Right? And these are really good opportunities to talk about lessons that you've learned in practice too. So giving your own examples of when maybe you tried something in practice and it didn't go how you wanted it to, it can show students this is just really a phase that everyone goes through, but it also gives some specifics on what you would do differently now, like hindsight, right? It can show that growth that we're trying to see in our students too. It just normalizes the growth process essentially. So in my opinion, sometimes level 2 students can hide a little bit easier in supervision, meaning that maybe they're not asking as many questions in an effort not to seem incompetent. So it's important to do those check-ins, to ask specific questions or set checkpoints where they might come update you on something before moving on to the next phase, or update the group on what's happening. And you don't even always have to be that specific about it, but just saying, hey, we want to know how it went next week. Maybe before moving on to the next phase of this, come back and let us know. And then I'd love to talk about it as a group again before you move on. Right? That can work too. So level 1 students sometimes need this as well, as far as setting goals and having them do these more frequent check-ins. The difference is that oftentimes level 1 students are going to go ahead and ask a ton of questions and not be really confident in trying anything on their own, whereas level 2 students are probably more comfortable to try it and jump in. And sometimes that's great, that's fine, and that's what you want. You're just going to have to determine that with your students. So level 3 students are the most comfortable and confident, but they also understand the value of feedback. They're confident in their skills, and they're not hesitant to ask for help or to show their insecurities. So they're really great to have in group supervision because they share their own experiences and feedback to other students. So they're usually the ones who, when you open it up to the group and say, who's had an experience like this, or what's some other ways that, so and so might have dealt with this situation, or what are other ways that you've dealt with this situation, brainstorming, they're usually coming with some really good examples. And level 3 students learn a lot by reteaching what they know. So that's another great way to build up their skills, is by having them do more teaching for students at maybe a lower skill level. So knowing what we know about the various skill levels of our students as their supervisor, I think it's nice to break down. This is a nice breakdown of what we're offering to each level as a supervisor. So for level 1 students, it's important to understand these students sometimes have no examples of practice really to draw from. So as a supervisor, We need to be bringing a lot of examples, asking group members to share experiences and examples, as well as giving exact language for them to use. I think it's important to gently ask your students to take notes in supervision, especially if you're giving them specific language or step-by-step instructions to implement. So I think that that's important for level 1, and as supervisors, how we can really help grow their skills. For level 2 students, as a supervisor, it feels more collaborative. So you probably are asking students to explain what they did and why. Provide the opposite opinion to give them an opportunity to see different outcomes or viewpoints, and ultimately offering guidance for growth. So I think that really engaging with level 2 students to have them talk about why they did what they did can be really beneficial. Level 3 students typically need less direction, and really what they're needing is permission to take risks and to take the lead. So overall, level 1 students need clear direction and instructions. Level 2 require more of a conversation and a back and forth while providing information and collaboration. And level 3 is much more trusting to allow these students to develop their style without too much intervention. So they are really the ones in the group who are a great asset to have to be offering feedback to other students. So for group supervision, when we're talking about structuring, I think that there's a couple there's lots of different ways to structure it. I think most supervisors follow some sort of routine. Even if you don't stick to an agenda, you have some sort of set routine that you usually do in supervision. So for example, some groups do really, really well with students just taking turns and talking about cases and offering insight, and it flows well. In other groups, you might have one student who shares a ton, and then another 1 or 2 students that don't share at all, or who aren't willing to take that risk. So we do want group supervision to be beneficial to everyone. So it's important to make sure that you, as a supervisor, are involving everyone in the group. That's really your biggest goal. So students often learn a lot from each other in groups by discussing cases, having the opportunity to weigh in, the back and forth, talking about their own experiences. That can be really valuable. And so I'm just going to go through a couple different options as possible ways to structure your group, but of course you can tailor it to work however you want with your students and your agency. So the first idea basically of structure is having an agenda to follow each week, which gives the supervisor and the students a good guide of what to expect. So this is kind of an example of an in-depth agenda that you could use in group supervision. Of course, you can make it appropriate for your group and change it how you want, but one method of doing group supervision is with this detailed agenda so that you have a lead student each week who's responsible for bringing all of the topics to discuss. So of course it's important to do a quick check-in with the whole group to address any concerns, crisis situations that a student's having, something like that really needs to be addressed, but then turning it over to the student who's presenting. And one important aspect is for them to bring a case to present on, or just to do some of that case consultation, and if possible something good that they did or that they're proud of, and then also something that they would like guidance on for improvement. So if it's appropriate, it would be good to look at documentation as well. Of course, you have to follow all privacy policies, so maybe it doesn't work exactly as it would with individual supervision, but I think it's helpful for clinical settings specifically. So the next few items, including maybe doing a resource review or talking about an ethical dilemma or a theory or an article review. So not all of those things are going to be discussed each week, but maybe it's up to the student to have one that they would like to discuss or look at or gain a little bit more information or feedback on. And then to end, it's important to note any follow-up items that the supervisor or the students are responsible for. And so basically using an agenda can help to give the students an opportunity to prepare something to present on and not feel so on the spot. However, it's important for you as a supervisor to make what they are presenting on applicable then to the rest of the group. So one way to do this is to encourage the group members to be the ones to ask the questions and to offer feedback. And I often ask group members who've had experience, if they've had experiences similar to this, or once you get to know, um, exactly what each of your students are doing, it's easier to say, oh, this sounds very similar to the case that you presented on last week. How do you see the similarities? Or um, if you're seeing an ethical dilemma within the case that they're presenting, really bringing light to that the ethics involved, and saying, who else has had an experience involving this specific ethical dilemma? So it's, as a supervisor, it's kind of picking out the key piece that you think is applicable to other group members and building off of that. So it doesn't feel like it's just you and that person, one student who's presenting or having a conversation back and forth. It's really, wow, this is a really interesting case. What do you guys think? What questions do you have? How would you proceed? Sometimes I'll even stop a student and say, okay, that's a really good background of the client. Can we go around and have other people say where they would take the session or the assessment or whatever it is from here? And then once everybody has an option to share, we can have that student come back in and say, now what did you actually do, right? So that can be a really good way too of opening the conversation to include all of the students. So another way of doing supervision is really with less structure. So maybe not having an agenda or a star student, a presenting student every week. Sometimes I have had groups where my students have this really great understanding of what supervision is like, especially with a group of 2 to 3 students can be really good with this. And so we have a little looser session structure. Especially when students are doing similar things. So with smaller groups, it's obviously easier to split the time between the students and giving everyone space to share. So some supervisors might choose to switch to a model that just uses a little less structure the longer they've met with students in the group, and as they are all getting comfortable with kind of your style and you're getting comfortable with their style. So if you decide to use a structure, a model with less structure, essentially, it's important that you as a supervisor are really comfortable at guiding the conversation to make it meaningful. Kind of like we talked about in the last slide, as far as it's your job to make sure that everybody's participating and getting an opportunity to share. So a lot of times what I might do in a group setting that I have a little less structure is I usually open up the conversation at the beginning, inviting students to just share a case and say, okay, who has something they'd like to share on today, right? And just waiting for someone to share, and then opening it up again for the group for their reactions, insights, suggestions. So I just think it's good to be really listening for kind of the things that I said in the last slide, those ethical issues, those theoretical approaches, a macro issue, some other common task, really to highlight and ask the other group member to share on how they've seen something similar in their practicum experience. So for example, if a student is talking about a client maybe who's struggling to get connected to a resource in the community, as a supervisor, you can open it up to the group and say something like, this is a really common experience. Where you're working really hard on behalf of the client and they're just not able to connect with this agency that you're trying to refer them to, or maybe the client decides not to put forth the effort for a variety of reasons, or they don't qualify for the resource. And who else has had some examples of this happening in their practicum, right? So you're opening it up and you're saying, this is common and here's some examples of why. Who else can share something similar? What did you do? And that can be a good learning experience for both students involved. So when you're connecting students' experiences, you're able to talk about bigger social work issues as well as they apply across more experiences. So this can also create opportunities for students to share experiences in a really genuine way instead of more of a presentation. which sometimes happens when you have more of an agenda. So I really like doing a little bit of both to give students an opportunity to prepare if they have a lot of anxiety or if that's something that they need to do, but also to have more in the moment sharing for having those opportunities. Typically, students start to understand that you're always starting the session asking students for cases to share. So they're just going to start automatically doing that or mentally preparing a case for supervision because they know that that's what we do in supervision. Um, but this method takes a lot of thinking on your feet to work to find connectors between students' experiences, which is especially true if you're supervising students at multiple agencies, doing a variety of things. That's really what I do. I supervise students who are at all different agencies. So I think it takes a little bit more practice of figuring out how to relate different experiences to different agencies. But that it also means it takes a little bit more time for students to fully understand what their peers are doing at their practicum agencies. So it gives you as a supervisor more opportunities to make these connections for the students between the agencies, between the tasks that they're doing at different agencies. So for example, if you're talking about types of assessments, it can be really helpful to ask students to bring examples from their agencies if they're able to have several assessment options available to talk about the differences and the styles of completing them. And for advanced students, I usually ask for you know, or I'll send out a quick write-up of a theoretical approach and ask the students to come with examples of how they implement it with their clients. Something like that. So really kind of giving some tasks of how do we look at one thing like an assessment and see how it's done differently? How do we take a theoretical approach and see how it's implemented across different agencies? I think sometimes that can be beneficial for students in learning the concepts. For BSW or MSW foundation students, I often will bring examples or ask them to bring examples of resources to present on in the community that they're working with, or even really what examples of what their agency does specifically. Then they can often use that to refer their clients to. So really starting to understand what's available in the community. How do I advocate? How do I refer to different agencies? What does this look like? So having some of these activities in mind as a supervisor can really keep students on track. And of course, some weeks you may just have to talk about self-care or let students vent about how hectic their schedules are, which is also a really important part of connecting and having good group cohesion. So don't feel bad if you need to do some of that. So finally, I just wanted to offer as you're starting your group supervision journey, these are just some really good examples of sample questions to kind of have in your back pocket to pull out during supervision, because these questions can easily be adapted to engage all the group members. These questions also include ideas of how to incorporate their coursework, values and ethics, theories, and even overall growth and skills. So these can be really good, especially if you have a quiet group. So however you choose to do supervision, it gets easier the more often you do it, and some groups are better than others, and some students have a better understanding of what it needs to look like. But overall, you just kind of have to figure out your style, do some trial and error, and hopefully you got some good tips in this video. Please don't hesitate to reach out if you have any questions or concerns or would like more information, or if you have some other ideas of trainings that you would like to see.